Anyway, President Trump's attack of George Conway followed his tweet by Trump's campaign manager. We all know that Donald Trump turned down Mr. Kellyanne Conway, for a job he desperately wanted. He barely worked the Justice Department and was either fired or quit or what, didn't want the scrutiny. Now he hurts his wife because he is jealous of her success. POTUS doesn't even know him. Well, George Conway told the Washington Post that he has a decades-long relationship with the president and turned down a job offer at the Trump Department of Justice. Last November, Conway told Yahoo News that he withdrew his name from consideration because he was not interested in the job. Let's listen to him.
I'm watching this thing, and, you know, it's like the administration is like a show in a dumpster fire. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. I don't know. I realize, you know, this guy's going to be at war with the Justice Department.
Michelle, this is a cast of characters here. I don't know. I mean, what does he do? Just taunting this married couple, Kellyanne and her husband, George, just trying to get in a fight with each other? What? This is sitcom stuff. Not even sitcom. It's soap opera.
I guess, although I would assume that, you know, George Conway's tweets and comments probably hit close to home because, you know, George Conway's in a position to know the true character of this president and his administration. One thing I wanted to add about why the president is particularly or could be particularly obsessed with John McCain right now, you know, a lot of his grievance about John McCain stems from McCain giving the Steele dossier to the FBI after the election. And, you know, we've just recently, there was a big story proving at least one of the allegations in the Steele dossier true, and a lot of other ones have been substantiated as well. And so that's something I think we should keep an eye on. If he's really, really angry about the Steele dossier right now, or he's really obsessed with it, what does that mean about, you know, what we might expect to learn in the coming weeks?
Katie, your thoughts about this? Because, by the way, I can see where he's upset that George Conway, Kellyanne's husband, or Mr. Kellyanne, as they call him, he called the president a narcissist, a pathological liar, and unfit for office. I guess that would be a cause for concern.
I guess you could. It stands to reason that the longer you poke the bear, so to speak, you know, you're just inevitably going to provoke a reaction. He had been asked by aides not to do anything, that George Conway was not worth it, that it didn't rise to the level of it. But this weekend, George Conway was sharing, you know, screenshots of bullet points of narcissistic personality disorder to Twitter. It was going viral, and, you know, eventually something had to give. I spoke to George earlier just briefly and said, you know, what's with the ramping up of the tweets? And you're talking to reporters now, and he said this prompts a bigger reaction, being called out by the president. So I don't think it's going to stop anytime soon. And you're right, it's like a telenovela. It's like sort of who's on whose side.
Right.
I think he's spot on the diagnosis. I think that's something that we need to pay attention to.
Mm-hmm. Well, yesterday, Kellyanne Conway herself responded to a question about her husband's tweeting.
Kellyanne, your husband has been tweeting his concerns about the president's mental fitness for office. Are those concerns that you share, or how do you deal with?
No, I don't share those concerns.
Well, anyway, I want to ask you about the dossier, because it keeps coming back, Katie. The dossier, right? And he's blaming McCain for that as well as everything else, saying that he gave it to the press. He didn't give it to the press. He gave it to the FBI after the election. Why is he still focusing on the dossier?
Well, there was a segment on Fox News this weekend where Ken Starr was talking about John McCain, and there was a tweet to the president's Twitter account shortly after. I think some of this is, you can't really think too deeply. He watches television all weekend long. He didn't go out golfing. He left for 4 hours to go to church, you know, over the weekend, and he saw a segment on TV. I mean, like, it's of course a nagging worry of his that these investigations are sort of swirling around, but Twitter is sort of a pressure release valve for him, and to put too much into what he's thinking from moment to moment is you know, we do these. We
got a new focus group out of Wisconsin. It says basically it's not working anymore. What do you think, Michael? This tweeting constantly, this misbehavior. It doesn't have anything to do with a reporter, by the way, for Access, sat down with a focus group of swing voters in Wisconsin over this past week, and several Obama voters who switched to Trump in 2016. That's an interesting crowd. Said they're getting tired of his lies and the way he treats people, the human behavior of the guy. In fact, one Trump voter said, I don't think I'll vote for Trump again. I don't think he'll make it. You know, this is a focus group, as they say, peasants under glass, you know, the whole thing. You know, the knock on them. You never know if they're saying it for show.
There's some smart peasants.
I know, but you just never know where they're telling it because that's what you're supposed to say. I'm very skeptical. But your thoughts?
No, I'm never skeptical of focus groups because they are the closest to getting your finger on the true pulse of some things out there. Not all things,
scary.
but
you think
things.
Trump's tweeting is turning off the base?
Yeah, I think it's not necessarily the base, but what is his base? His base is the 90% of Republicans that identify with Trump, but there are other Americans too. It's not just that 90%. All right, I don't know why we got to keep acting like the only thing that's voting out there are just Trump people. The rest of the world gets to vote too. Independent voters who move towards Trump are moving away. That's what that's about. That's what's being reflected in the vote that you're beginning to see right now.
Oh, I just think it's important to note that his supporters have stuck with him through a lot worse things that he said.
We got 46% our latest number of him.
You know, I sure would like to see some.
That's job approval.
Congressman, go ahead. Congressman, go ahead. What do we make of the fact that 46% in our polling still give him job approval despite all this 8-year-old behavior by an 8-year-old and all this other crazy tweet? They said, yeah, but he's our guy. Why?
Yeah, well, I mean, I happen to believe that one of the reasons is because it's the first time in our history that a president has had his own TV network. So if that's all you're watching is that other network, you have an entirely different reality. But I wonder about polling in some states that have been hit really hard and hurt because of his policies toward China, where they have lost contracts. The Chinese have now moved to Brazil to get some of the products that they were getting from Kansas. So I don't know. I think we need to pay attention to the areas that have been definitely hurt by his policies.
Well, that's in the Midwest, too. Anyway, President Trump has given a subdued response to the New Zealand mosque attack during the 2016 campaign. Candidate Trump often spoke about the threat posed in the U.S. from Muslims, as he put it. But now the president and his allies deny his rhetoric, and immigration policy played any part in fueling that deadly violence down under. However, a source close to the president tells the Washington Post that many of his political calculations are based on how his supporters, whom he often calls my people, or the base, will see an issue. So, Michelle, is he afraid to say anything good, or bad, rather, in this case, about the shooter? Because it might offend his base? Is it that bad?
So honestly, I don't know whether he's afraid or just, Trump is a liar, but in some ways he's quite sincere in that he has a hard time saying things that he doesn't mean in the moment, right? He has a hard time kind of playing lip service to ideals that he doesn't in fact respect. It's the same reason why he couldn't pretend, or he couldn't kind of maintain the pretense that he objected to the white nationalist marchers in Charlottesville. And so he doesn't feel it, right? He doesn't feel any abhorrence for white nationalism. And so he's not capable of expressing it.
Yeah, but
Congresswoman, last word here. I want to ask you about the President of the United States. I know you're a Democrat. He's sort of I guess he calls himself a Republican. I'm not sure what he is. But this indecency, this inability to express a national, for our country, he is a representative of our country in the world, inability to say, that guy used my name in his manifesto, and I don't want anything to do with that crumb. He's a killer. He's a bad human being. He's a murderer, a mass murderer. Probably sick, but who knows? But I don't have anything to do with that guy. He doesn't seem to have that gut sense of, I've got to get this guy separated from me.
Well, I don't think if you look back to the beginning of his campaign, he has never separated himself from white supremacists. Remember, he didn't, David Duke, he wouldn't even disavow that. What he needs to do is make a speech to the nation, and now, unfortunately, the world. He needs to completely denounce white supremacy. He needs to attack anyone that would associate him with it. But I think anybody that has been favorable to him, no matter who they are or what they believe, he will never come out against them. It was so sad that he could not say the word Muslim. He couldn't express any empathy to the people that had actually been killed. But he has been consistent about this.
And he's a consistent narcissist, because you just defined
it.
It all revolves around him, as you put it. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming on, as always, Congresswoman Karen Bass of California, Michelle Goldberg, for your lyrical essay tonight. Again, thank you.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.